is a very talented musician.
Really?
He's a very good.
That's awesome.
He's really good. Yeah.
I didn't get to hear him do anything.
He used to play. So I lived. Rob and I could tell stories because I was best friends with Rob when I was a rebellious teenager, and we lived in his parents' basement, and it was high school party central in that basement.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know if nice is the proper term. Anyways, so he used to play in a band called Sister Ray, and they changed their name to Holly Pollock, but they used to play shows at the Icebox all the time, every Friday night. When I was in high school, I don't know if we talked about this on the pod before. When I was in high school, downtown Salem was like a hoppin' pop, punk, rock musical scene.
Yeah.
You would have a place, there was a place called The Sit, which was a tea bar. They'd have shows in the basement. Icebox shows, Coffee House Cafe would have shows. The Guff Cup would have shows. Like every Friday, Saturday night.
There are bands like the Skybridge Gypsies.
Oh, dude, yes. Actually, I saw the members of the Skybridge Gypsies are still around. One guy is the bartender at the place on Fork 40.
No way.
Yeah.
I know him.
Lucas, he's in the back, I think. I haven't seen him in probably over a decade.
Crazy.
But another guy who played the mandolin, he's around town still. I think he works at Olive Garden. I saw him the other night. I don't know. Yeah, there's a local band. There's a band called Typhoon that was local in Salem. They played on Dave Letterman's show. I think that's Salem's biggest claim to fame. Or the keyboardist for Portugal the Man is also from Salem.
What?
You didn't know that either?
I didn't know that. I knew they were from Portland.
I don't think when Portugal the Man was at their peak. I think he went to Sprague, if I remember correctly.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
I knew they were Portland or Portland, kind of Alaska.
Yeah, they're based mostly. They had some members from Portland and stuff like that. And so, yeah. So there's more of a hoppin' music scene now these days. There's still a music scene in Salem, but I feel like it's not as prevalent.
Yeah,
it's out there. I talked with our worship guy Stevie, and he plays with a lot of different bands, and it's just turned into more like playing at bars. It seems like this is kind of where
more cash.
Yeah, or like private parties. There's some smaller venues, but it used to be like high school kids with punk rock bands
everywhere.
I mean, not everywhere, but there was enough like from Sprague, South, West. I think there's some North kids in there too. I think it's the biggest kind of. But anyways. Dang. Yeah, but it was fun. This is good musical era for downtown Salem.
Wild.
You never know.
You never know
what happens in downtown Salem.
You never know.
Now
sometimes I don't want to know.
Now it's like there's a bunch of stuff going on. If you drive downtown now, the old Nordstrom's was leveled, so it's going to be all housing / I think 15% affordable housing, and then they're redoing the Liberty Plaza.
15% affordable housing.
Yeah, 15%.
It's like
so it's like 15%. You're like, okay.
It's something dumb. It's like it was supposed to be a bunch of units, and then they dropped it to it's like 4 units.
Speaking of finances and the economy, a TED Talk dropped 4 days ago, and it's been getting some traction.
Okay.
I just watched it this morning. I would encourage you to watch it, but he curses, so have a forewarning. Just have forewarning when you watch it. It's by a guy named Scott Galloway. Have you heard of that name before? So he's a professor at a college at NYU, I want to say, or some college in New York. And it's a fascinating watch.
How the U.S. is destroying young people.
Yeah. It's that whole, we talked about last time about the economy. It's the whole concept that it's been told to us our whole lives that the economy that we are going to inherit is going to be better than what our parents had. Yeah. And it's not, that just hasn't been the case. And then he goes through these stats. I mean, they're undisputable facts. And it's just, it makes you kind of angry. But it's pretty fascinating to watch through it. The biggest one is like the most recent federal budget they passed. There was, I believe, a huge portion of that was going to Social Security, and there's a much smaller portion that was going to go towards younger families, as in tax credits. Sorry, for child, it's what they call EITC. Yeah.
Income tax.
So they're going to like raise that or something like that. So in the budget, they axed that part, but they kept Social Security. And so it's more of just like the older generation are the ones who vote for the most part.
Yeah.
And so they prioritize. So it's you have to watch the guy's video.
Yeah.
Again, he curses in it quite a few times, but it's just a very fascinating watch
Yeah.
because it's undisputed facts. I think that is
Yeah.
what he uses from
Yeah.
studies, and talks about COVID and how much wealth transferred, and it's easier to be a billionaire than ever, but harder to be a millionaire type of a deal. So it's fascinating to watch.
Interesting. Yeah. Back when they were trying to avoid the government shutdown,
I feel like that happens all the time now.
it's just like I remember when for like the first time it happened, it was like, what?
Yeah, and now it happens like every 6 months.
Yeah.
And then they just approve like one that gets them another 3 months,
Yeah.
and then another 3 months.
So there was Rand Paul
Okay.
was giving like a little thing on like we can't pass this, and he was just pulling up some of the stuff that was in the bill that was like nonsensical.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he was talking about was he's like, hey, look at this. So 2/3 of the budget, the stuff that we can afford, is untouchable.
Yeah.
So the only things that we can afford, we can't even go in and like trim some fat off of it.
Yeah.
So the third of the other budget, like we can't afford it. Like we don't bring in enough revenue and taxes to pay for a third of our federal spending.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what? And then he starts listing things that the government has paid for, like one of the. I mean, there's some just really, it's almost funny,
but more depressing.
But it's just sad. One of the ones that he brought up that was really interesting was specifically, it was like $1.5 million going to hospital improvements for Martha's Vineyard.
Okay.
And I thought his point was interesting because he was like, I think improving hospitals is great. I think that's something we should do. But the federal government should not be investing in this way. Like, we're not like, if you read the laws of this land, we're not supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the taxes at the federal level are supposed to be for the benefit of all people.
Not just people at Martha's Vineyard who are extraordinarily wealthy.
So if the people at Martha's Vineyard, if they want to enact some tax code or something,
do a bond or something like that,
then they can do that. But the entire country doesn't need to pay for hospital improvements at Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting stuff like that. That you watch it and it's like you can't. It's really hard to not be frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So
what an interesting day we live in, though.
Yeah, very interesting. Hey, on another note, a couple Sundays ago, we were hanging out after church.
Yeah.
And we asked one of our most dedicated listeners. I won't say who this person is.
Not one of our most. I think we could define him as the most dedicated listener.
The most.
And I said he, so now you know the gender. So there's a 50% chance.
So it's not Ronnie and it's not Ryan Unger because they don't go to our church.
We got some healthy feedback. Well, that's actually a great conversational note today. As healthy feedback. Anyway, I don't want to cut you off. So
no, we got healthy feedback, which was good. But his healthy feedback was we've been talking about slowing down too much. But waiting for 2 weeks.
So we're taking it out of every title of the video now.
Yeah.
Well, we've heard the feedback. It's good feedback. Good feedback.
I think it's good. We hit episode 25.
Yep.
Which I feel like that's cool. A little applause.
Nice.
I don't know. It's like that's like 6 months of podcasts.
I think put it that way.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
52 weeks in a year.
Made it halfway there.
Yeah.
Halfway to a year.
Yeah. But I was like, that's kind of true. Like maybe we should come up with a new topic for the pod, or like a more focused topic, and one I've been thinking about a lot lately. We've been talking about a lot of this stuff with, the government and economy and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think at least this is how I'm thinking about it. If you boiled it down,
if you boil the government,
burn it. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. If you boiled it down, I think there's a lot of different ways you can think about it, but I think an interesting way to think about this is discipleship. And I mean, it's first of all, it's one of the definitive things that Jesus tells us to do.
Yeah,
is to go make disciples. So there's that aspect of it, but I think just at a more general level, I think based off of Scripture and what was God's design for the Israelites,
Mm-hmm.
right? And all of the rules that He gave the Israelites in Leviticus and throughout Exodus and the Old Testament is to have this people group that is set apart, that looks different from everyone else around them. There's rules for hygiene, there's rules for sacrifice, there's rules for how you live and how there's and how you treat other people in your land that just didn't exist anywhere else. Like now, like we have laws and rules, and every house, parents have rules for their kids, and cities and states and governments have laws. That's just like a common thing now, but not so much back then. So the Israelites are a group of people that are called to live apart, and I think that still holds true to this day. I think for followers of Jesus, that the standard that we are held to is in part so that we live separately from the world.
Yeah.
Not like, we don't circle the wagons and become recluses necessarily. Sounds fun, but
to some, to introverts,
I think it'd be great personally. But I think it really comes down to, I think of it as like, well, so what is, talking about Social Security in the older generation, what is the older generation giving back to the younger generation through discipleship to help bring up the younger generation in a world where the church is doing what the church is supposed to be doing?
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, that's my...
I think we've talked about this at the very beginning of the pod, the idea of discipleship. I think it was when we were having the conversation about mega churches and all that type of stuff. Large church, small churches. And But it begs the question of like, what is authentic discipleship? Because I think people would define it as basically simply spending time with someone else.
Yeah.
I think that's obviously that can fuel discipleship because you can't disciple someone without spending time with them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'll tie back into a sermon from yesterday. Well, if you're listening on a Wednesday or later on Sunday before. Being able to accept the idea of spiritual maturity, being able to accept difficult feedback, I think is a level of discipleship that is lacking. And the example I will use is the healthy feedback that we received from our incredible listener on Sunday.
Yeah.
We're like, hey, and we got feedback, and it was good for us to hear because then it allowed us to make changes to make either the podcast more relevant or to make it more helpful for people, because what we want to do is have content, it's called Spiritual Gap, to help people in the gap throughout the week just to continue to think about Jesus and following him and our walk with God. And so we need that feedback.
Right.
If we didn't have that, then we would just keep going this way when it would be ineffective.
Yeah.
And so I think in people's lives today, they are ineffective, but at the same time, maybe they don't either have the humility or maybe they still have the person who's there to be able to guide them. Because the reality is, though, everybody needs that person.
Yeah.
There's never a time when it's like, I don't need anybody in my life
100%.
to give me feedback anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the idea of, like, Jesus sends out his disciples. I don't know the exact reference, but there's this passage where Jesus sends them out. What's it? Just with, like, a staff, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And they go out, and then they come back. And so he's sending them out kind of into the world, coming back. It's a training kind of thing. Well, send them out, come back.
Yeah.
How to go? How can you improve? Go back.
Yeah. Well, and I think too I feel like the crux point with being able to accept criticism is what are you doing this thing for?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're doing something for yourself, as opposed to doing something for the benefit of the community or the benefit of the kingdom, it's much harder to accept criticism. Because if I'm doing something for myself, if I like the way I'm doing it, I don't need criticism. Like, I like how I'm doing it. It's fine, but, and so when someone, when you are doing something for yourself, or you're doing something for the clout or whatever, the status or something, when you receive criticism, it hurts because it's like, well, it's like, it's someone's giving you criticism about you, but when you're doing things, I think, for the kingdom, for the community, for the betterment of other people, I think it's a lot easier to accept criticism because you have, if your goal is, I want to bring the kingdom to earth, or if your goal is, I want to inflict positive change in this community, it's so much easier to welcome criticism because if the criticism is helps you do that better, I think you're more open to it, you
Mhm.
know, because I think if you're walking around like, I want to do this thing the best way possible, and someone's like, hey, I think I noticed something that maybe you didn't. What if you tried it this way? Or what if you did this thing? Or hey, when you talk like this, it comes across this way. You know, I think that means a lot more to people than,
Yeah.
if you're doing it for something other than selfish reason.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think the challenge in that is, I don't know if I would use the word criticism because I feel like that is overtly negative. And I think when you receive challenging feedback, or I would define it more as like healthy feedback, because that to me is not criticism. That's just an honest take on what you're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I think the hard part is people avoid those relationships. Like,
Yeah.
because it's hard to receive that feedback. And I'm not saying we should go out and just like, woe is me. And, I think there's obviously a healthy level of confidence. Like, this is what I'm called to do.
Right.
But at the same time, being able to ask for healthy feedback from somebody that you trust, somebody who's further ahead in life than you are.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that means they're older than you. Whatever it is, and they're more spiritual, mature, they've been following Jesus, someone that you highly respect. And then you can ask them like, hey, this is what I'm doing, or this is where I want to be in my life, or this is how, this is the type of dad I want to be. Do you see me fulfilling these goals right now? This is how I want my relationship to God to look like. I'm not going to say slowing down because that's what I'm talking about, but that whole idea, you know what I mean?
You need to slow down
Yeah,
and accept criticism.
Right. But it's
Yeah.
I think it's having those relationships. And what we are prone to do, even on a generational level, is cut off. So even like we're talking about that TED Talk, and you should go watch it just because it's a fascinating watch. But the temptation is to cut off and be like, well, now it's going to turn into boomers versus millennials, and that's not going to be helpful.
And that's not the goal.
It's not the goal.
We're
We're all human beings, all made in the image of God. But at the same time, we need to have the mutual respect that we can voice our opinions and also have the humility to receive feedback. And I guess one of the greatest examples of that is Peter. Peter messed up and denied Jesus. And even though Jesus told him he was going to do it, and then afterwards, like, think of that humility Peter must have felt.
Yeah.
But when Jesus, has that thing, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? It's just a beautiful. I mean, that to me is feedback. That to me is what authentic discipleship is.
Yeah.
When you walk through life with someone, and even if a mistake is made, like Peter made, Jesus does not shame nor guilt. Do you love me? Like, Peter, I'm still for you. I'm with you.
And
I wish that's what we had.
Yeah, and I think that's why I think
We can.
for me, I think that's why it comes back to discipleship. It's like, hey, if we had discipleship, it would be, I think, a lot easier for the younger generation to understand the older generation and vice versa.
Yeah.
It is just so. Oh man, I don't know if this is the tangent I want to go down, but reading through the Old Testament and how, I mean, we haven't talked about Israel Hamas in a while.
I was actually about to bring it up because of the protests that have spiked everywhere.
Dude, I feel like I just got to take notes on the rabbit holes we need to go down. I mean, the protests, we can get to that in a second, but when we first started talking about Israel Hamas, when when the first attack was made and things were happening, there was a lot of us talking about it's a really hard conflict to understand. It's not simple by any means. And so one of the things we were talking about, and that, we were talking about Preston Sprinkle and Theology in the Raw and how he brought on many different voices to talk about the conflict with Israel Hamas and Israel Palestine and just the general temperature of the region. That was really enlightening. And I think one of the most impactful ones for me that a Jewish scholar brought up was, looking at the laws of the Old Testament, that the nation of Israel as in the Jewish people, is supposed to follow, that they're not. They're not treating foreigners in their land the way they're supposed to. They're not, adhering to, these years of Jubilee and all this other stuff, but they
interesting.
still want the promised land. And I think in a lot of ways, I think, us as Christians, as followers of Jesus, I think we have a lot of that same humanity in us. Is we we don't do the things as a church, capital C church. We're not doing the things, and obviously this is a blanket statement. There are, of course, people that are doing this, but we're not doing the things that we're called to do, like, or at least like discipleship and how do we handle our money as a church? How do we treat people outside the church? How do we treat people in the church? And so there's all of these things and these missteps where the church isn't being the church, which that's going to happen. We're people, but then the church isn't the church. We're not doing discipleship well. We're not we're not loving our neighbors. We're not doing all of these things. And then we wonder like what's happening? Why isn't the church growing, or why isn't this community strong, or why do these things, why are their marriages falling apart? When it's like, well, are you doing the things you're supposed to be doing? Are you raising up a new generation to be, to be followers of Jesus? And are you following Jesus?
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting, like we look up and we're like, I think it's that, like, the most terrifying line in the New Testament of Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not drive out demons in your name?
And Jesus says, I didn't even know you.
I don't even know you,
Gosh,
man.
That's terrifying.
And so I think there's so much of that right now of people just being like, God, I'm doing all of these things for you, but like they're not. I don't know.
And I think part of that goes back to this whole idea of the discipleship, where we need to have somebody in our life that's giving us feedback that is challenging feedback to hear. That's just a reality that everybody needs. So typically, I would actually say that immaturity, we talked about this yesterday, the differences between spiritual maturity and spiritual immaturity. And you could kind of tie that into emotional maturity and emotional immaturity. Peter Scazzaro says you can't be emotionally immature and be spiritually mature. They're not intertwined, but they're definitely connected.
And vice versa, right? You can't be
and vice
spiritually
versa.
mature.
Exactly. And so I think there's a lot of people that don't have the maturity to be able to receive the feedback that they need to receive.
Yeah.
Because what happens is, for the immature, you are so defensive. And maybe it's like, oh, we've done it this way for so long. Like you're wrong, I'm right, without even listening a little bit to someone else.
Yeah.
And I think my conviction as a pastor was, like, I think I understand that there was definitely a gap that's been missing. And I'm someone who has greatly benefited from the local church in the 90s and the 2000s, and I think a fairly decent church experience growing up. But I also I saw blind spots, and my conviction was that I need to go and help. Like, my calling is to help fill where some of those blind spots are. But I'm also aware that I have my own issues,
right?
And I need healthy feedback from people too.
Yeah.
But I think that's what some challenges I see in the church communities today, and oftentimes, I scroll through Twitter sometimes, which is probably a mistake. But the megachurch pastors, they kind of, I'm not saying a hyperbolic statement, some, more of like the conservative aisle, as in like, classic megachurch models is what I mean by that.
Yeah.
If you have any type of healthy feedback, criticism, I guess you could say, maybe challenging feedback, more often than not, you get immediate defensiveness.
Yeah.
Immediate, like, this is what we're doing. We have all of these people, and then it comes down to how you're defining success, all those type of things.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, again, that the size of your church defines how great your discipleship is. But what I am saying is that there's definitely a lack of acceptance of feedback where they could utilize that gift that has been given to them to be able to turn the dial and potentially reach more people or have more in-depth and discipleship and bring people on a path of spiritual depth and maturity.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, it's an immature response of
Right.
crossing my arms and I'm not going to listen to you. And I'm not even saying you have to listen to every little piece of feedback.
Yeah.
But it's at least giving the respect of like, okay, like I value your opinion, but you know, I see things a little bit differently, and that's totally fine
Yeah.
too.
I think that's important with criticism is if someone, you know, I get this fairly frequently with, you know, the work I do in creative work, because everyone's got their opinion on a photo or a video or whatever. And sometimes you just need to say, thank you, I appreciate your comment, but I'm not going to do any of that.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes
Like,
people
thanks for your
give
feedback.
great feedback, or sometimes, you know, you agree with half of what I gave feedback to. A friend of mine sent me a video the other day, and I gave him some feedback, and he was like, thanks, dude.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's
Okay.
cool. Like, doesn't bother me, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. And it's too, I think the discipleship isn't for the sake of criticism.
No,
I think
not at
that's super important too, is like discipleship is for the purpose of relationship, you know? And I think, you know, what's important with that is, you know, it's a model of Christ and the church. It's a model of the Trinity within itself, is community and being with one another and conversing with one another.
Yeah.
Excuse me, conversing with one another, learning from one another.
And definitely, as you just said, all feedback is not created equal.
Yeah.
Because if that was the case, we would all be depressed just scrolling through the internet.
Yeah.
With all of the, you know, so like feedback you receive from someone that you don't know, like that is on, like, say, like a D tier, like
Yeah.
A, B, C, D. That's like a bottom tier.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
I don't know who you are. Like you could be giving me a gift. This could be helpful feedback or not. Feedback you receive by somebody that is your friend that you trust, that's A tier.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
like, I care about you.
Yeah.
And I talked about this at a message a while ago. I couldn't really go 2 weeks ago. I couldn't go into more like details about it, and it might have been a little of a stretch. But I just keep thinking about it. And it's from the season of Survivor, where there's this girl who was on Survivor. I forget her name, but she was highly obnoxious. She was so annoying, and I think she's lived that way her whole life, and it's just like the way, like, people are like, oh, the way you do this, like, it really bothers me. And so in Survivor, like, you're not friends with anybody,
Yeah.
and so they weren't afraid of stomping on her feelings, and so they just like, poof, like, eventually they just told her, like, this the way you do this is highly obnoxious. You know, it's really rude, you know, something like that. Because she was like really analytical, wicked smart, and so she wouldn't have much of an emotional filter.
Yeah.
And so people told her that. And then Jeff Probst, the host, one day said, in the game of Survivor, you have basically the opportunity to get feedback because people aren't your friends.
Yeah.
Because at home, people are like, oh, I don't want to tell Steven that, like, he hurt
Yeah.
my feelings because,
Yeah.
like, what are the ramifications of that, whatever, you know? And that, to me, tells that the culture might not be healthy because you want to be in a place where you can give feedback. But it's just interesting to see because sometimes maybe someone who doesn't know you may give you the best feedback. I guess you don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of played out, but it's that the challenging feedback that sometimes we view as a curse, or I guess a curse, but it can be the greatest gift you may receive, because then you can utilize that and work on it.
Yeah.
And so a practice you can do is somebody you trust. You can ask them,
Yeah.
like, hey, like, what's an area you think I could grow in my life? Like, hey, all walls are down. Like, I just want to know. I'm not going to respond. I'm just going to listen. I'm not going to be defensive. I just want to hear where you're at. And you receive that feedback, and you're like, it's terrifying to do.
Just kidding. Take that back.
Yeah, or like as a boss or someone who oversees people in the workplace, ask the people who are your employees.
Yeah.
Like, hey, like, how do you think I am as a boss? Like, what's an area I could improve in? That is one of our sayings as a church is, I'm not very humble, but humility finds me. So if you want to find that humility, that's a really good way.
Yeah.
Because people could be like, because you might be wanting to get compliments on the back, but if you say, hey, like, walls are down, tell me anything goes. Like, that's what I want to hear. And someone says, hey, you're super angry all the time. You're really short-tempered, and people are afraid when you're around. That's tough feedback to receive.
Yeah.
And you're going to want to be defensive, like, well, I didn't sleep very well. I've got a busy life, all these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
The mature
You don't know
response.
what it takes.
Yeah, you don't know what it takes, all the stress I'm under, whatever. The mature response is, wow, that is not how I want people to feel around me.
Mm.
What do you think are some ways I could change so people don't feel that way?
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's brutal though, man. And by brutal, I mean that's humility. Like that's spiritual growth right there.
Yeah.
So as challenging as it is, man,
Yeah.
you will receive more growth in your life from that feedback than 5 years of just, living your life. In my personal opinion.
Man. What if people did that? What if people actually did that?
That's the question, bro. I don't know. That's the question. Like, are people actually going to live this out? And that's what I think as leaders that we got to do by example. So,
Yeah.
I try to have really open feedback. I get a lot of feedback that there's a lot of areas in my life I can improve on, and I do my best to, work on those things, to not stagnate, to continue to grow and mature. Because there's never a time when it's like we're done.
Yeah.
Just check out, cruise, sailing, like the multi, generational. That's the stuff, man.
Yeah.
But I think it's obtainable. I think it's possible.
I think we can, man. I think I think our generation is very pain averse.
100%. Why do you think that is?
I think this is a perfect segue into the riots in libraries. I don't know. I think
Portland. Every time Portland. It's always somewhere else begins it, and then somehow Portland.
We're just like, hold my beer.
Yeah, something like that. Break into the library, and then I think they made like their own, kind of like, remember in COVID times they had Chaz in Seattle.
Yeah.
I think they did their own thing in like the Portland State Library. Made their own,
Little village,
something like that.
I think it's hard, man. I think for starters, it's so hard. In the climate we live in, I think it's so hard to get accurate information. For starters,
Yeah.
like what? Because there's people saying like, oh, you go ask a protester and they don't even know what they're protesting about.
No.
You're like, okay, I'm sure that's true for some of them, but I'm sure there are other ones that do understand. But I don't think most of them understand what's actually happening in Palestine. I don't know, man. I think it's really challenging to really pin down like why is our generation. I think I think the older generation thinks our generation is entitled, and to a certain extent, I think there is some like student loans. I think is the big one. Like, I was talking to a buddy about this the other day who, he went to Corbin and, so he has some student loan debt.
Is Corbin expensive or something? I mean, every private school.
Boy, oh boy.
I think Corbin's running like what, $50,000 a year?
I think it's got to be at least that.
Yeah.
Dude, I just can't imagine graduating with a mortgage.
Yeah, $200,000 sometimes. Yeah.
Crazy. Anyways, but there's people that are like, oh, this younger generation, they don't want to pay for their student, they don't want to pay for their student debt. And on one hand, I'm like, yeah, you should be responsible for your debt, like you should be. But then, so I guess I have three sides of this this bizarre thought triangle, right? So on the one side, you have the like, yeah, you took out the loans, you should pay for that, right? The other side, this is my like the bias side. I was like, right, like Brooke and I can't get a loan for a house right now, right? But you can, at 17 years old, you can go get student loans for $200,000.
No questions
to go
asked.
to Corbin. No questions asked. If you did that to a 17-year-old kid as a mortgage lender, you would go to jail for predatory lending.
Wow.
So on the one hand, you're like, wait a second, like this seems a little funky.
Yeah.
Right? That we do it this way. And then you look at the increase of the cost of just administrative costs of universities has skyrocketed compared to actual teaching faculty costs. You're like, why do we have so much administration? Go away, admins. Like, let the teachers do their thing, or the professors do their thing. So there's that side of things, right? But I think there's this. So I think that's another side of like, well, getting rid of student loans doesn't solve the problem of why is school so expensive. Because people like, if a 17-year-old kid's like, I want to go to this university, I want to become a doctor, like, how do you do that? You know, if without something like student loans. So on the one hand, it's like it's an interesting problem. I don't think we should just delete everyone's student loans, but it is interesting. So, but the third thing for me, and I think this is why I'm so keen to talk about like discipleship and the church and what is the church's role? What is like the, you know, how should Christians be living apart and viewing the world as opposed to how the world views the world? How do we stay untainted?
While you're going on this thought, are you saying that potentially Christian universities should be cheaper and more affordable than secular universities?
I'm going to take one step further. Christian universities should be free.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Effectively free.
Okay.
For starters. I mean, I don't want to go down that. There's another rabbit hole that I won't go down. But
I'm gonna make that shirt. Bryce Funk says, "Quote: Christian universities should be free."
Effectively free.
Effectively
free.
The effectively would be a really small font. Though.
Yeah.
Free.
Yeah. Well, I think okay. So here's the thing, right? If you are in the older generation and you truly believe in investing in the younger generation, why are you not supporting them through college? Or like if there's, you know, like my whole like high school education, like it pushed you have to go to college. If you don't go to college, you're going to end up in prison. You're going to be poor for the rest of your life. You can't do anything.
Yeah.
That's not true. I know so many, the most successful people in this country have not been to college or dropped out of college, you know? So I don't think college is like this golden ticket to success, you know? And so, but I think if the older generation of believers really wants to invest in the younger generation of believers, which I don't see them doing. I don't see that level of discipleship. Like, why are we not financially supporting?
Yeah.
You know, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to tell people again, not everyone needs to go to college. Like, you don't just need a sociology degree just to have one. If you want to go get one, that's fine, but understand the consequences. If you're just going to get a degree for the sake of getting a degree, don't get a degree. That doesn't make any sense.
I will say it's happening on some level. Like we're not. I don't think we're saying it's happening. Never.
Yeah.
Like I know a friend of mine.
No, I don't think never.
I think somebody paid for his entire degree.
Yeah. Well, and it's like,
you know,
I think maybe we talked about this on a different episode. I think of a pastor that we knew was a missionary from Brazil. And someone from the church, they couldn't buy a house for some reason.
You said
someone from the church stepped in, bought the house for him, and then basically lent it back to them.
Yeah.
You know, it's like cool stuff like that where you're like, yes, why is that like, why are those stories like few and far between?
Yeah.
You know?
I do think it's talking about Christian universities, and I don't know if this probably ties into discipleship, but I understand that there's a cost to, like, you want to pay staff. In the same way, like, you don't want your pastor to be like you want to be able to support your pastor.
You know, be like, my pastor
and staff and all that stuff.
Lives in that tent behind the church.
Yeah, I mean, that's not what we want. But I understand, like, on a Christian ministry level or Christian education level, you obviously want to pay your staff.
Yeah.
But I think it's fascinating that it seems like private Christian universities have taken the same, like, they followed the same curve as secular universities.
Yeah.
I have not done enough research, but it seems like there's no difference at all.
Tuition's going up.
And I get that to a certain degree.
Staff wages are going down.
It's, what is the goal behind it?
And I think here's the hard sell on Christian education for me. Because I thought about transferring to Corbin, and then I figured out how expensive it was. And I was like, how expensive it is when you could go get, like, I have a bachelor's in applied math. I could go get a bachelor's of applied math at Oregon State University for a quarter of the cost.
That's crazy.
I'm like,
why is that? Is it just more expensive? Because there's federal funds or something like that. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there's like an over $1 billion endowment at Oregon State.
That's probably why it's something like that.
It's one of only 2 universities in the country that are sea, space, and it's like 2.
Oh yeah, I heard that.
Yeah. It's like us and Oregon State and Penn State.
Nice. That's a great school.
Yeah, it was a really good, but that was like a hard thing for me. People are like, oh, the community. I'm like, no community is worth
Yeah.
that much.
So here's a question.
I already
kind of-
hang out with all of you, and I don't pay for it.
so bring it back a little bit. What do you think
You know?
will bridge the gap? Do
Yeah,
are we going to be cynical and say it's not possible?
it's not possible. Yeah.
Or like what? And that's why, like, when we talk about the church should be different, that's why I believe in multi-generational discipleship, where it's like
Yeah.
you want everybody to have a piece of the pie. Like
Yeah.
everybody is involved in this together. And you read in the book of Acts, it's like they didn't like segregate groups. It's like, no, we're all in this together,
Yeah.
as
Dude,
High School Musical would say. Like this is we're all going in the same direction as followers of Jesus. And like there's definitely things laid out in New Testament, like we take care of widows, single mothers, like that's like we take care of each other.
And orphans.
And that's what, like, I was
Yeah.
thinking about, like, we talked about a couple episodes ago, the church in India, the mega church in India, they have like 100,000 people. They pay for all funeral costs for every single person involved in their church. They send them a birthday cake, but just the compassion, like, hey, you're a part of something.
Yeah.
Like this is your family, you
Yeah.
know? And when we say family, in our context, like you can't know everybody like in that church, like 100,000 people.
Yeah.
There's a group that you know, but it's more of like, hey, you're a part of something.
Something like Bridgetown, where there's more people meeting in
Small
homes
groups during the week. Yeah.
than in church. You're like, yes, thank you.
And it's that level of discipleship. Like the fun thing, like for us, like at our church right now, effectively, like we have 2 services right now. Adults in the service, we have, I think, maybe one service are like 70 or 80 is the most.
Mm-hmm.
On a typical Sunday, our first service will have 30 to 35 adults, and our second will have like 50 to 65. And so effectively, that's like a large small group in a way. But like if someone, like we had a new family this last weekend, I'm like, immediately it's like, boom. Like you know when someone's new. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pros and cons. But you can, like, what we want to communicate is like you're a part of something.
Mm-hmm.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad to think about how many people go to churches and they feel like they're not a part of something.
Yeah.
And when we talk about a part of something, I'm not even talking about like a small lowercase c church. I'm talking about the capital C church as well. Like this is the family of God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the discipleship, I think, comes into play. And that is when we have that commonality that's bringing us together. So I guess when we think about how do we bridge that gap, it's the centralized mission of Jesus and the gospel.
Yeah.
And then the belief in that mission to go out and make disciples of all nations should bring us together from all generations, from teenagers up to the silent generation, which is, I think, 80 and up right now. Maybe 80 and up, something like that.
I mean, I think there's a certain level too of we have to break the cycle, because I think you were talking about like Christian universities have fallen into this, like, what's different than a Christian university and a secular university.
And a lot of Christian universities are transforming more secular, as in like they are adding more like liberal arts types programs, like nursing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. Like we want
yeah.
those. We would love nurses. We want more teachers, all this stuff. But it's just interesting where they are lowering their.
But it's like Corbin, you used to have to minor in a biblical study.
Now you don't
You
anymore?
don't have to anymore.
And so it's like it's effectively just secular private college.
It's just a really expensive private college that's loosely Christian.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I don't know.
It's I think it's really interesting, and I mean, I get something. This is Foster Care Awareness Month right now, and something I'm super passionate about. But like we talked about us on the last episode, there's like 61 foster families in all of Marion County, and you're like, what? I think for me it comes down to, like, as believers, what are we living for? I think it's up to, if we don't see it in the older generation, or we don't see it as much as we would like to in the older generation, I think it's up to the younger generation to look at, like, what is happening in scriptures, what are we supposed to be doing based off of scripture, and how do we get back to that? We need to get back to that. So, I mean, I think of, like, this is like one of my favorite passages in Acts of. It's in chapter 4. It's kind of the end, verse 32. Now the full number of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. And with great power, the apostles were giving their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and the great grace was upon all of them. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as were owners of lands and houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as they had need.
Nice.
It's stuff like that where I'm like, that still happens 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But does it happen? Like, you can look in every church and there's people with needs that aren't getting met.
Mm-hmm.
Both physical needs of like, what can we solve with money? You know, like the resources of the kingdom that has been entrusted to certain individuals. How can we use that to help other people in the church community? But also just the resource of time and commitment and discipleship and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I think definitely. Well, I think that passage talks about again, like, you're a part of something. I think that's what it speaks to.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not alone. You're part of this family.
Yeah.
We take care of each other, right? We're kind of we've talked a lot about the millennials and the boomers and kind of the tension that's there. I will say that I think the millennials have done a very poor job at respecting the older generation.
Oh, totally.
100%.
I
I think the Bible has a lot.
Mad.
Yeah, I think the Bible has a lot to say about even the gray hairs is the crown of wisdom.
Yeah.
And I think that millennials and younger, like 30s and below, have been very disrespectful and have not honored the older generation and viewed their input and knowledge as unvaluable,
yes.
which I think is a tremendous
So
mistake.
now there's those that are in the old generation that are trying to disciple and be that voice, but the younger generation is just closed off to it.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's interesting. So we talked a little bit about the protest, and I was watching a YouTube video. He's one of those guys. He's like a boots on the ground journalist, he would define himself. So he just goes to where there's stuff going on. He just walks around with a camera and a microphone and just interviews people.
Yeah.
So it's very much unproduced in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you get what's going on. And so he snuck into Columbia University in New York, which is kind of one of the original protests.
Yeah, the big one.
And he's just going around asking people. And it was so fascinating. And at least there's probably people there who are mature, but the majority of the people that he interviewed, the immaturity is just, it's undeniable.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't film here. We don't want to talk to you, and maybe they've been, manipulated before or taken advantage of by people trying to get a sound bite or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a complete lack of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maturity shows we're willing to listen to someone who sees the world differently than us.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed very much so like, nope, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we don't care what anybody else says. And sometimes, like, he would ask them, and they don't even know why they're there.
Yeah.
Like, what are you protesting? Like, oh, we're free this, whatever.
My favorite one is when they ask, so you say from the river to the sea, and they're like, what river and what sea are you talking about? And they have no idea.
And it's kind of like that meme of the guy with the cardboard sign.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we're protesting, we're mad. What are you mad about? Everything. Like, there's,
Yeah.
I think there's just a lack of awareness of kind of what's going on. And then, they don't like the police and all this stuff. And it's just so fascinating. And then there's a lot of drama that comes with it. Like, do they go too far? Like, like in Portland, they took over the Portland State Library, and then the police were going to go in. And then the district attorney said, we're not going to charge anybody if you arrest them. So they're like, okay, then I'm not going to risk our police officers, so we're not going to send them in at all. And it just turns into, man, it's so hard to navigate those with such high anxiety. And by that, I mean, it's like there's the brain on that point is on a level where you can't speak reason.
Yeah.
It's just like level 10. You can't reason. You can't, like, that's why it's so challenging. Like, what do? You ask them, like, hey, like, this is something we need to, this is not safe for you to be here. You're costing the citizens of this community tons of money.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's peaceful protests, and it doesn't seem like that's what it is.
Peaceful does not mean non-destructive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it's just, it's really difficult. So there's, again, kind of tying back to the beginning, we have to have the ability to receive feedback. And even if we don't agree with it, we need to have the maturity to be able to listen really well, listen intentionally. Because even if you don't agree with it, more likely than not, there's at least a tiny little nugget of truth that's in that feedback. Even if 95% of it, you're like, man, I just do not agree with that. 5% of that is probably accurate.
Yeah.
And there's something that you could learn from that feedback. There are some times when some of it's 100% negative and it's just not helpful at all.
Yeah.
But 99% of the time, in my experience, there's, even with most difficult feedback from really challenging people, there's at least a tiny little nugget that you can utilize as a gift to be able to work on yourself and your own emotional health and spiritual maturity.
Yeah. Can I end this with something funny?
Do it.
So
it's a humor pod now.
I do some YouTube content stuff.
Okay, yeah.
And I got some criticism from someone once.
Some healthy feedback.
It was just really dumb feedback.
Okay.
They said, you hold your chin too high. That's all they said in the comments.
Yeah.
So you hold your chin too high.
Okay.
So now it's like the running joke with Brooke and I. Like, whenever I do YouTube videos, she's like, make sure your chin's down.
Hey, maybe your chin goes down and you reach more people. I don't know. Who knows?
I don't know, man. I was just like,
the internet's a funny place because that's like, you would never say that to any, like,
if I just saw someone on the street, I would never be like, you hold your chin too high.
yeah.
And I was like, maybe I'm like, this was like an instructional video on how to do something.
Yeah.
And like, you hold your chin too high. And I was like, wow.
Okay.
So now it's like worse. Now I'm like always thinking, I'm just like, or I'm like tucking my chin into my shirt, you know?
Yeah. I receive feedback
Anyways.
sometimes when I first started preaching. I had people come up to me and say, like, especially when I was really young. So when I started preaching, like 23, older folks specifically would feel very comfortable giving me feedback. And I'd be like, okay, that's cool. So like, Steven, you look to the left too much, or you talk too fast, or all this stuff. And at that time, it's all good feedback.
Yeah.
But I mean, I still get that feedback. And again, whether I agree with it or not, like there's more likely than not, in those cases, lots of truth.
Yeah.
Where we can like use that to grow and not be defensive. And kind of tying it all back in.
Slowing down.
Yes, right. I think we're talking about the discipleship. Discipleship only happens like we listen to something like that. We're talking about on a pod, or we listen to someone talk about discipleship, and we think someone else is going to do it for us. I think the reality is, if you want to see discipleship happen, it starts with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, I totally want to see great discipleship happen in the community I'm involved with. I'm just waiting until it comes to me. You don't wait till it comes to you.
Yeah.
You do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you go out there, like find someone, anybody that you connect with, and you just invest your time into them.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Study the Bible.
Yeah.
Pray together. Talk about life, encourage each other, all that stuff.
The likelihood of someone walking up to you and saying, follow me, is pretty slim.
Yeah, that's right. Look in the Bible. Jesus did it very well, but
But there's tons of people, Zacchaeus and others, that went and sought it out.
Yeah, yeah. But I also think, like, I don't want to say that the discipling relationships, obviously, you're not giving healthy or hard feedback the majority of the time. That's like 5% of the time. 99%, or let's say 95% of the time is like encouraging, good feedback. You're doing such a great job. And then maybe every so often, because usually if you get challenging feedback, at least for me, like that one comment, how long ago was that comment that you got?
It's probably like 6-8 months ago.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so anything that's we would define as critical or challenging feedback, it always goes to the top of the list, and we think about it for years.
Yeah.
Someone could have given you a compliment 8 months ago, and you probably forgot it by now.
That's true. I don't remember any other comment on
It's
that
the
video.
ones that are challenging we remember. So you have to be very strategic. You always like do the sandwich layer. You get positive, positive, positive. A little bit of like, hey, this is an area I noticed you could work on, and then 10 more positives. And then even after saying 20 positives and one thing that you can work on, guaranteed that person will leave thinking about that one thing they can work on. Yeah, whatever it may be. So what I'm saying is the discipleship, it's a relationship. It's doing it together. It's investing in someone. It's being intentional, intentionality. It's giving really positive feedback. And when called for, it's giving challenging feedback in a see you next week.